Well, hello there, everyone. We are just delighted to see you all somehow finding a way in the final day of April to come together for a little bit of literacy, learning, and collaboration. My name is Leyton Schnellert, and I am a faculty member at the University of British Columbia in the Department of Curriculum and Pedagogy. And this series, along with the other series, have been a labor of love and co-funded and organized by BC's Rural Education Advisory and with funding from the Ministry of Education in partnership with UBC and specifically the Edith Landau Virtual Learning Center. Just a reminder, if you haven't checked them out before, we have recordings of all the previous sessions on the Edith Landau Virtual Learning Center website. I'm just so fortunate to be here today with my colleagues that I've worked with in all kinds of ways, in all different kinds of contexts over the years. And so I just want to say how grateful I am that Faye Brownlie has returned to join us for today's session. Faye and I have been learning together through this series with you all, as well as Dr. Harini Rajagopal, who presented in last year's series and is also a faculty member at UBC in the Department of Language and Literacy. We're so delighted that Michelle Hikida has joined us today, who will pop her head onto the camera in a moment because she's sitting next to Faye. Or her hand anyway will come anytime now. Here comes Michelle. We're in Michelle's classroom. Great. There we go. And we're super excited that Gina Wong could join us. And Gina, we're just so thrilled that you're able to make your schedule work. I know it was going to be tough initially, but somehow we did it. We did it, people. Working with literacy educators who are deeply connected to kids and classrooms, as well as theory and research, is a hallmark of literacy in British Columbia. And we are all together teacher researchers. And so we're just really excited to be working across our roles to share this series with you. To offer a land acknowledgement. So we here at UBC are on the unceded, traditional, and stolen territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam. And I have been so fortunate, Harini and I have been so fortunate to learn with elders and knowledge holders and come to understand that the language and the literacy of this place is inextricably connected to the language of these peoples. And this is the place where these languages are spoken and originate. And we also understand that culture and language and land and literacy and identity are interconnected. And so it's with deep respect that I acknowledge this place that I get to research from, to teach from, and that my office is based in, even though I spend most of my time in the rural communities across British Columbia and getting to know and work with nations in all of those places. We just want to acknowledge that in this work together, we are taking up an anti-racist and anti-colonial stance, and that's often quite uncomfortable as we try to take up learning and practice in ways that don't just maybe reproduce approaches that are harmful to some and reproduce privilege for others. And so I acknowledge my own humbleness in sometimes not even realizing things that I do and I need to undo. But certainly this work is undergirded with that stance that is anti-racist and anti-colonial. I'm grateful to be here today. And I just was so fortunate to be with folks through the Rural Education Advisory yesterday, which I co-chair, spending time with folks in the Ministry of Education and just in conversation about how in the work that we're doing, specifically in literacy, we're working really hard not to get caught up in one perspective or another that's quite out there right now in the literacy world, but working across paradigms to really recognize that the sciences of reading are all important and that we really are working from an evidence-based perspective in what we're doing. And so we've worked really hard in this series and will continue to really make space for everyone to engage collaboratively in supporting all of our students and drawing across theory, research, and practice, and not discounting one field of research, but really looking to understand what's there and what we need to draw from and draw together in our work. I'm going to pass the torch to my amazing friend and colleague, Faye Brownlie. Faye, we're just so grateful that you came back and let us rope you in for one more session. And Faye, I can only express my appreciation and your leadership in this province in terms of leading literacy learning and supporting your colleagues across the province.
Thank you, Leyton. So Leyton mentioned that the Ministry of Education, he noticed yesterday when they were meeting, they're really talking about practices and pedagogies and trying not to get caught up in labels and to really listen to one another and think about what are the pieces that make the greatest difference for our kids. And that's very much what I want to center my little bit today on. I've really been influenced over the past year or so, I think, when I first discovered Dr. Maren Ackerman. You'll see a website at the bottom. Harini, because we're all in this together and trying to figure what's best for our kids in our province, sent me this link just after February and the 17th and said, have you seen this? And Dr. Maren Ackerman is a professor, the Workland Research Professor at the University of Calgary. She was invited to Ithaca College to do what they call their Freedom Lecture as part of this series. And she's known for her, I would say, calm demeanor in presentation, her thorough research, and her attempt to just open up doors for conversation among teachers and researchers about making the best difference we can for kids. So I'm using actually some of her slides. I really liked her perspective, and I thought this voice could really help our conversation in the province. And so in my next 20 minutes, that's what I'm going to try and do, is invite you into some of the learnings that and reframing that I've had as a result of listening to Dr. Ackerman. And hopefully this will spark some thoughts for you and open new doors for conversations as well with your colleagues. So I'm going to start by putting out, as Leyton said, we're thinking about sciences of reading. One of the things that I thought was intriguing that Ackerman did is that she said, we actually have multiple views of science of reading, and people have been saying this for some time. But her categories, I thought, made a lot of sense to me. So one of her categories of science of reading is what I think of as the media view of science of reading, which is phonics is a cure-all. We haven't been giving enough to kids. If we just gave a little bit more to kids, everybody would be fine. What program are you using is frequently a question that I hear teachers ask me or asking among themselves. We use this. What do you use? And the media frenzy, because I think it is a frenzy that comes with this view, is there's a crisis in reading. And the crisis has been caused by teachers not doing enough phonics. And so that's one of the views of science of reading. And I think about, if I were a new teacher and just starting in and trying to figure out what I did in my primary classroom to move learning forward, I'm being bombarded with this all the time. Having said that, the research, the solid research that's looking at practitioners working in classrooms with teachers and saying, what are we seeing is making a difference? And there's a different view of science of reading, and that Ackerman is calling structured literacy, picking up on phrases that are used by Christina Ordex, Louisa Moats, the International Dyslexia Association. This is their view of science of reading, and this is what they're supporting. And one of the differences is this is looking at more broadly based research that can be replicated, that can be read about, that is being done by not necessarily publishing companies, but people who are examining best practices with their point of view. A third view of science of reading is sometimes considered more to be of sciences of reading and is a little bit more broadly based. Ackerman calls this the comprehensive research-informed literacy instruction. I think we talk about it in BC as evidence-based informed literacy instruction. The base is a little larger. I think it's a slightly different definition of literacy. If we think about our provincial definition of literacy, it's looking at readers who read with thought and critical thought, who employ different thinking strategies, and all of these pieces come together, and it's reading and writing that are infused throughout the curriculum. So when we think about that, the piece that, of course, always comes back that, so we can talk about these pedagogies, and that's fine, but what is that going to look like in the classroom? And what decisions am I going to make as a teacher? And how's that going to impact the learning of my kids? So let me step back a little bit, because what I'm going to do is look at some comparisons between the structured literacy and comprehensive literacy. And my intent in doing this is to try and get us out of the labeling piece. We've worked really hard in this province in all the decades that I've been involved in education in taking labels away, so that we're not putting people or programs in categories, but we're discussing practices and with a strength-based language, and we're looking at making the greatest difference for kids. So if we look at the practices and what the comprehensive research says, that's really been involved in a lot of this conversation, is going back to the National Reading Panel in 2000 and what they call the Big Five. Nobody disputes any of these. The Big Five are: all children need these 5 aspects of reading in order to grow as readers. All children need phonemic awareness. All children need phonics. All children need fluency. All children need vocabulary. All children need comprehension. The challenge that we have in our classrooms is deciding on how much of each do we have for the group of students with whom we're working. We all know that we have diverse classrooms. We all know that children's strengths and stretches vary individually and within the group, and sometimes from school to school and region to region, but nobody disputes that all 5 of these aspects are important in literacy. The challenge is thinking, who are my kids? What are they doing well now? What do they need? And what can I teach holistically with the whole group in here? And what do I need to diversify to meet the needs of the range of kids that I have in my classroom? Recognizing that we need them all. And we need them right from kindergarten. Okay? So one of the pieces that I think we get caught up on is the whole piece around phonics. And do we or don't we? Again, I've been working in this province in literacy for decades, longer than most of you are alive. I don't know any teacher who's ever said to me, oh my gosh, I never ever do phonics. Kids don't need it. They just get it by osmosis. Okay. Now, one of the things that the media push has done on that view of science of reading has helped us look more critically to see if we were doing enough phonics. And so some teachers have said, you know what, I think maybe I wasn't. I was being a little too implicit. I needed to be a little more explicit. But it's not the only piece. And some of the research that there's some misconceptions around has to do with the phonics research. Targeted explicit instruction in phonics is important. Absolutely. We have no evidence that there is a crisis in education in BC. Do we have kids that we know that we could do better with? Absolutely. It's why we all keep teaching, because it's never the same. We think, what else can I figure out? Who else can I work with to figure this out? There is no one size fits all way to teach phonics. If there were, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And we wouldn't have been having it years back. There is such a thing as too much phonics, because remember, it's one of 5 pieces, and it is just one part of what matters. And we need to be really careful that when we increase our focus on phonics, we don't leave out other aspects that are critical. Teachers have said to me, in the province since Christmas, I don't really have time to write any longer because I've increased my focus on phonics and it's making a difference. But maybe my kids will write more next year. Teachers have said to me, I really don't do daily oral reads any longer. In fact, one little girl in grade 3 said to me, oh my gosh, we would never have time for that. We have packages to do. Okay, well, oral reading counts, and we know it counts for all kinds of reasons: community, vocabulary, building our words and our worlds. Okay, and some teachers have said, well, no, in fact, I've been in 2 different teachers' classrooms where there were no books available for the kids to read because they didn't really have time to do choice reading. They had a few packages of decodable books that they did at certain times, but no choice reading. Now, All of these pieces, again, are because sometimes when we shift our focus to something to try and increase it, we let go of something else to pull it in. And we want to keep coming back and saying, what are the parts that we need to have in here for everybody? So Ackerman looks at ways of comparing. She has 6 lenses that she looks at to say what makes a difference. What's the view from structured literacy and comprehensive research-based or research-informed literacy, because they're both research-based. So my mistake. One of her lenses, and I'm only going to talk about 3 very quickly, is the role of the teacher. You'll notice in the Venn diagram that there's many shared characteristics. And I just urge you to keep coming back to this common ground and then think about what it is we need to know as we expand out to other areas of the circle. Both provide teacher-centered explicit instruction and practice. We always come back to gradual release. I show you, then you can do it with others, and you can do it by yourself. Both believe in this, okay? Both believe in instructional implementation of best practice, right? We're solidly standing on, this is what I believe from the research I know to be best practice for my kids, and here's what I follow. What's different from a research point of view is the comprehensive view also facilitates student-centered talk, play, creativity, and inquiry. And at this point in time, structured literacy doesn't have studies that support that. Okay, that shows up in the comprehensive view. It doesn't in the other. Also in the comprehensive view, the teacher's role is to be a flexible, observant responder. Think of how often when you're working with your kids, you start with a specific plan in mind, and as you're watching them, you adjust and shift your plan. You don't just do what's coming next in the book, you shift your plan based on what it is your kids are doing. And we know that whole focus on oral language, play, joy, infusing the work that we're doing makes a difference for kids. Look at this kindergarten class. This was 2 weeks ago. It was in Yellowknife. The kids had an hour and a half of working on their loose parts. They've been playing with space. It's their passion these days. They started with reading a space story together. They added on some new information to what they were learning about space. They went off, they built their space story. And that piece took about half an hour, okay? They left their loose parts on their tables. They went out for recess. They came back in. They'd been talking to one another, building their stories together, sharing that oral language. When they came back, they picked up their clipboards and they started drawing what it was they had in their story, which gave the teacher time to move around and hear some of the stories because the kids were all really engaged. And they moved as they were ready to writing their story about their picture. Now, they're in very different places in the classroom, physically, emotionally, and academically. This little bunny decided on her own that she would put down, as she explained to me, all a line for every word that she was going to write. Okay. Now, she's told me the story about being in space. You actually even get to a rainbow in space. You know, it's a beautiful space story. She's going on a mission while she's there. It'd have been one of the words that in the oral read aloud. And then she's written, remember, she's told me I've put a line down for every word, but she didn't have time to finish. I was in, look at her phonics knowledge, and she's stretched it out. She's bubble gummed it all, and she's given herself a line for each group of sounds that she's hearing. And she is very excited about her progress as she goes. Okay. Now, here's another one, very different. One of the most fluent writers in the class. I was quite blown away with what he's done. His detail in building that log cabin was miraculous, and it was again when he started to do the drawing. And then he's written, me and Jason was in our cabin and I saw, you'll notice that he's crossed out saw because he said, I don't think I spelled it right, so I'm just going to cross it out so you won't see it. And I saw an alien and I was scared. Okay. Kindergarten. Now, is there an expectation that all kids are doing this? Absolutely not. Is there freedom that's growing from the experience in the class to do this? Yes. And we're moving with this and the language that's permeating this class and the work that the kids are doing together allows the teacher to lift and support each one as she's moving around. Ackerman also, one of her lenses, looks at understandings about children. Both believe earlier is better. Okay. If you can get things introduced and sooner, this is a good idea. I actually have some questions about that and worry about how much we push down into our junior Ks and our Ks and our preschools. But there's a lot of research in both fields that looks at earlier is better. There's also that shared understanding that background knowledge connected to the dominant culture is an important resource. Okay. I think one of the things that we also work on in BC is our background knowledge connected to the non-dominant cultures, right? But all of those pieces coming together are shared by structured literacy and comprehensive literacy. Structured literacy focuses and believes one right way works for everybody. And so it's our job as teachers to figure out what the one right way is. That varies from the comprehensive focus, where we focus on different children having different literacy needs and benefiting from different approaches. So there may be a time when we need a structured program borrowed from the structured literacy for some children at some times. There may be bits and pieces that are going back and forth. It's never just one or the other. Our job is to think about what's going to work for these kids. Comprehensive literacy, developmentally appropriate teaching, what's going to be right for these kids, and considering children's prior experiences, their purposes, their language, and their culture as resources for what we do when we're working together. The shift is also slightly shared and different in understandings about literacy. Both agree literacy involves cognitive skills. You need to be thinking and reasoning in order to learn to read, write, and grow your oral language. In structured literacy, the focuses on reading and writing are the same for everyone, and we're going to follow through on that progression. Whereas with the comprehensive approach, literacy is shaped by culture and context. It's social and it involves emotions. And so those are just beginning pieces as a way of looking in that I think help us think about how do we have better conversations instead of saying, are you this or are you that? And thinking about what can I learn from you and what can you learn from me that thinks about what do we know from our work with our students in improving literacy for all kids. So let me show you one more classroom example, because I think, again, that's the piece that we keep coming back to. What does it look like in the classroom? So these are ones and twos. They're in a classroom in Richmond. They're writing. The teacher and the resource teacher have been collaborating. They're working together during this writing piece. This is all done in the one period of about an hour and 15 minutes. They've said to the kids, today we're going to open a door and go into a kingdom. And they've started together with them modeling, let's draw a door, let's think about where it might be going. They've interviewed one another as teachers about what could be behind this door. The kids are helping them think about what could be behind the door. And then they start to model their writing about how they're going to enter the door and what they're going to see. Now, I'm very quickly going to show you 4 samples. So these are what the kids have done in this one class. Think about the language, think about the play, think about the shared experience, and then they each go and do their own. Welcome to the space playroom. My playroom has a swing that has a button on the chair, and if you press the button, the swing swings by itself. I have a rope that leads to a black hole, but it's not a real black hole. It's just a way to the slide. And when you slide down at the end, you will land in a ball pit. And then you climb the wooden, and it continues. Okay. Now, again, it's like the kindergartens and starting with their loose parts, going to their drawing, and then going to the writing. While the kids are writing, the teachers are moving around, having that side-by-side conversation with them. What are you proud of? What's working? What can I give you to stretch? When you enter the door, you'll go, wow. And then you will run in to get a vanilla ice cream because the vanilla ice cream is for free. And then you get 100 Big Macs just for $1. 1,000 milkshakes for $1. And if you order a Happy Meal, it is $1. And the toy from the Happy Meal is a car. Okay. Can't you hear those kids' voices coming through while they play with writing? Okay. 2 more. Okay. Once in the sun, there was a door. It looked like a magic door and you're in space, but there are plates and they are big and you have to jump on them. And if you stand on them more than 10 seconds, you fall into space. And after 2 hours, there will be lava. Okay. Look at the content knowledge that's coming through there. And then look at this little guy on the right. So this is a student with very complex needs. He's often working with an educational assistant. He is rarely out of the classroom. They work together. As he's going, you can see that it's been scribed at the bottom. And his piece is because he loves aquariums. Okay. Crab, when you open the door, you're in an aquarium. Okay. Catfish, frog, and monkey, snake, frog, and monkey. They show up in many stories. Sometimes he can read it all back. Sometimes he can't. Some of the printing he can do with help sounding out and bubblegumming the words. Some he needs to copy from what the EA has done. But it's never all of one or all of the other. It's a combination as to what he can handle emotionally and socially as this is going. But he's with them for the conversation and all of the work together. So I think about what makes the difference in here. And when we look at this big conversation that's going on around the province and everywhere, I'm thinking about, so when we're in BC, what is it that's anchoring our literacy practice? What do we remember as teachers when we come in to work with our kids? What do we value? What do we stand for? We always value diversity. Our classes are richer because of the diversity within them. We have a strong focus on including all learners. We've worked hard in this province to be responsive teachers, to know that the work that we're doing as individuals and as collectives in our school makes a difference for kids. We believe in multi-age classrooms and how that diversity allows us to work with more kids for longer periods of time when we get to keep them for another year and have them return. We know it gives us more options for placement in places where we've got large schools. We really work in trying to implement evidence-based practice from academic research, from teacher research. We have worked for decades to infuse our curriculum with thinking, to be wanting to build literate citizens who can not just read and write, but can read and write and think with the text that they are reading and creating. We believe in skills being taught, absolutely, we always have, and we believe they're taught explicitly and embedded. And so we look at how we get that 20 minutes of phonics instruction throughout the day. When is it separate? When is it embedded? How are we continuing those conversations? We also believe, and I think this is a really important piece, we believe as a collective, I know teachers in BC believe this, that all children can learn. And when we work together, we know enough to teach all children. And so I just think it is so critical that we continue to be working together rather than not together in teaching all children. One of my favorite quotes, and I'm going to leave this with you as the ending, is that we think about how do we know that there's not a crisis? How do we know that we're making a difference, that our kids are doing okay? When we look at OECD and the PISA tests and the PEARLS tests that have been undertaken for about 20 years, and we look at the results in 2022, Canada has consistently been the highest scoring English-speaking country in both those assessments. The highest scoring. We score high in achievement and in equity. And so if you don't remember what the PISA tests are in the PEARLS, this is when people say, oh, remember what the Finns can do? Oh, we're not as good as the Finns. There was a lot of conversation around Finland a decade ago, and everybody, oh, can we get better? Can we not get better? And now we look at the little satellite of countries that are doing really well, and it includes Korea and Singapore and Finland and BC and Canada. But we are doing really well among the English-speaking countries. We know we can do better. We know at the end of every year, every teacher looks around and says, oh, there's a child in my class I wish I'd had more time with. That there's always that perplexing piece of what else can I do? But we also know that we have not fallen off the rails here. And this conversation of are you or are you not really is best focused on how do we implement what is best and what we know about practice and do it throughout the day for our full variety of learners. So your task as we move into Gina and Harini is to think about that conversation. How does it connect to your thinking and your practice? And did you hear anything that nudged your practice or your thinking, or you think, I might like to look at this a little bit longer? And remember, when you have a moment in time, come in and watch this video, this webinar that Ackerman has done, and just, watch 10 or 15 minutes and think about it for a while. Talk to your colleagues about it. We're in this together. We need to work together to figure out what's best for our kids.
Thanks, Faye. We are going to move on to Harini and Gina, who are both hanging in there by a thread because they're both sick right now, but they're just so committed to the work that they will share it, and they'll just be at the occasional sneeze or cough, which is, part of the holistic approach to literacy, everybody. It's our whole selves. Over to you, Harini and Gina.
I'm going to echo that. Exactly. There's things that we just roll with, and flexibility is part of who we are. So just raising my hands to all of you for being here. Thank you for inviting us, Leyton. Vanakkam, namaste, and just a quick introduction. I'm Harini Rajagopal, Assistant Professor in Language and Literacy Education at UBC, and excited to be here with Gina, who will quickly introduce herself in a minute. But I just want to say we're drawn together, Gina and I, to tell stories, of what happens when we think relationally with each other, when we play with materials, and when we story and learn with materials from a space of equity. Over to you, Gina.
Hello, everyone. I'm Gina Wong, District Literacy and Assessment Teacher in the Vancouver School District. I work mainly in the primary grades, love kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and all the way up to adult educators as well, teachers. And most recently, I'm at the district level supporting literacy across the district and early learning. And so our land acknowledgement. With deep gratitude and respect, we are honored to be learning and unlearning on the ancestral and unceded lands of the Hamakwiam, the Squamish, Okameo, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations.
And with this acknowledgement comes the commitment to engage in ongoing acts of reconciliation with these nations who have been long stewards of the lands and the waters, which we call Vancouver today, and really so much gratitude.
So just want to begin with a quote from Richard Wagamese. He says, "We are not the things we accumulate. We're not the things we deem important. We are story, all of us. What comes to matter then is the creation of the best possible story we can while we're here. You, me, us together. When we can do that and we take the time to share those stories with each other, we get bigger inside, we see each other, we recognize our kinship. We change the world one story at a time." I'm just grateful for the opportunity to share a few stories from children that I've worked with across the district, with teachers that I've worked with, and how we are changing our world one story at a time. And just thank Faye for the story she shared just earlier, and how that is shaping the world that we live in BC, in our context. So really appreciate that, Faye. I want to begin with sharing with you, this is the Vancouver's Responsive Literacy Framework. I think the points that Faye talked about earlier really are reflected here in our Responsive Literacy Framework. As she says, we cannot just take one aspect of literacy and just focus in on that. All these aspects are integrated and connected and are needed to be fully literate and to be able to read, write, and using our various oral languages. So for our intention for our sharing this afternoon with you from Harini and I, we're going to focus on the center of the spindle world and around story, joy, play, identity, and wonder, and how all those other pieces of phonics, structured literacy, you can enter in all those places, but remember to keep the holistic picture in mind. Otherwise, things go askew, which we are hearing about more so now. A big piece of what we're going to talk about is validating the stories of our lives and histories and cultures that focuses around identity. Also, continuing to encourage wonder and play that allows access for all and equity for all learners in our multi-age classrooms and our diverse classrooms through play, through writing, through the arts, through reading, as well as centering on play and joy. When things are joyful, learning just happens so much more naturally. And so we want to think about materials as tools for thinking and reflecting. So storing with material, a few things we want to highlight when working with materials is materials offer and provoke us to think in different ways and looking at different perspectives. It also opens up different ways of engaging with not only the materials, but with one another. And it inspires us to reflect and play and imagine. So there are choices of possibilities when you offer different materials. If you have been reading some books like Story Workshop from Susan McKay, she calls that the affordances of materials and various languages of materials. And it allows children to begin with what inspires them and excites them. So we're going to share with you some stories of how children, and I think Faye has already highlighted how children have used materials to support their thinking and their ideas and their imagination and play. So, Harini?
So I'm going to offer 3 quick stories just to sort of ground us within this space of storying. And then Gina will take us through some processes in terms of how we can enact these within classrooms. This first one is from all of the stories that I am sharing are from beautiful Surrey classrooms with a project that I'm working on with the amazing Kerry Hutchinson at Surrey Schools. And this project is called Joyful Encounters with materials. This one is with loose parts. I'm also going to be sharing some work with clay. But this one is the story of how literacies move from imagination to creation to oral language to drawing and representing on paper, right? So you could see the monsters between the rainbows, and then you can see the drawing that's reflected exactly like the rainbows. And then here's his oral story. Tej Beer had just joined the classroom midway through the year, 2 weeks before this composition, and really we could see sort of the scope of literacy, the scopes that's possible with this type of work with materials. In the next slide, again, moving the scope a bit further, thank you, Gina, how the story moves from imagination with materials to creation to oral language to representing on paper with early writing. So you could see there Christmas, and you could see Christmas right there, and also the parallelizing in terms of the drawing and the colors with the loose parts. And again, Maya had just come into the classroom as a fairly quiet student, but highly energized by the possibilities of connection and the collaboration that working with loose parts offered. And you can see how they fall asleep, and all of the figures are fallen asleep on the in the image there. And in the next slide, just moving further along, imagination to creation to oral language, and then writing whole sentences. And Anaya was so proud, and you could see in the last piece on the writing there, the princesses, you can see the word princesses, you could see our collecting with the collecting, and look at that big word, gathering by color. And so just the amazing possibilities that get enacted when we free up our students to playfully enter into literate spaces. Over back to you, Gina.
As Harini has highlighted, you can see the language arts curriculum coming to life through those stories and those examples. Language and stories can be a source of creativity and joy. You know, the text and the story help us understand not only ourselves, but it makes connections to others and to the world. And that's just a couple of the learning competencies in the language arts curriculum. We also see the connections to the BC Early Learning Framework in developing a pedagogy of listening with one another within the class community, with the teachers, as well as the learning pathway around identities and belonging, right? We want to value the identities that the children bring and create a sense of belonging in our classrooms. The other aspect is connecting to the core competencies, the thinking that is evident. I can explore and play with materials and get at ideas. As children reflect on the process and their experience, they can say these things and acknowledge what they're able to do, right? And to share information about a topic that is important to them. So those are just a few connections to our ministry documents. And one of the other things we'd like to just share is in Vancouver, around storing with material, we designed a framework that invites and provokes children to begin the process. So if you're looking for a framework and say, how do I work with materials, you might want to think about using this as a process. And then you know, thinking about what kind of loose parts or materials you want to offer, invite the children to create and with it, and then think about how are they going to capture and record it. And oftentimes we take photographs, we invite them to draw and write, as you've seen in many of the examples already this afternoon. A big piece is the share and reflect. What is it that we hear from each other's stories? What do we see from their drawings? What do we notice as learners? And to give feedback, you know, acknowledging our identities and our histories and the stories that we bring to the classroom, as well as where are we in our writing and process, you know, and what are we able to show through this. So I want to just say, you know, Matt Glover says, children play stories, hear stories, start to write stories, and they create an understanding of the concept of story. And also Richard Wagme says, storytelling is about discovery. And here is a child, Emily, in grade 1. She came to the story studio for the first time and was provoked and inspired to create the story about nature and dragonflies. And if you read her story, what is it that you notice? What do you wonder? And how do you think that she's captured and shared her story? What does it tell you about her being a storyteller, a writer, an author, and an illustrator? And she says, once there was a little dragonfly, and its home was flower, and its favorite food was nectar from the flowers. It liked to fly around the flowers all day, watching the bees going from flower to flower, and collecting, look at that, collecting pollen, all right? But one day it rained and it rained and rained. It had never rained so hard. Didn't we just experience that this week? Right? And her ability to use repeated words for emphasis as a writer, that's amazing, right? All the bees flew to their beehive. All the birds huddled close together in their nests. Doesn't it just make you like, you know, want to huddle, how she's written it? But the little dragonfly went to the flower field and then the sun came out. Yes, we have the sun out again for us. So you can see how she's brought it all together. Her sense of voice, you know, her understanding of science concepts about flowers and nectar, and, you know, Matt Glover would call this literary nonfiction writing, which is complex for a young learner, right? Okay, and, you know, I think we've all, kind of hit on this. When children share their stories, it reflects their identity, as well as the First Peoples principles of learning, where it's embedded in memory, history, and story, and Learning requires the exploration of one's identity. This provocation and invitation I've used with young children all the way to adults, inviting them to create and reflect on who they are, creating self-portraits using loose parts. And it's a very easy invitation to offer your children, and you will learn so much about them when they why is it they choose certain colors or materials to reflect different parts of their self-portraits and to tell about it. And so here is an example of a young child, grade 1, Faye's self-portrait. The purple feathers represent her purple hijab, which conveys her pride for her Islamic heritage, being proud of where and who I am. And, you know, there's a picture of her with her self-portrait, and she's captured it in drawing as well as in writing. Hanik Peven could be your book of provocation. He does self-portrait collages, which you may be familiar with, but it's been used by many teachers across the province. If you're not familiar with it, you might want to explore this as a beginning. And then, you know, loose materials or any materials we use can also help us dive into deep concepts and complex concepts. So, you know, we have been working with slightly older children, grade 3, 4, around the land acknowledgement and what does it mean to have a home, and what is it to be, what does land mean? So this child writes as they learn about the Indigenous histories and cultures. Here are the houses, they're broken. The people sad, the animals sad, the plants are sad. Things are bad for the Indigenous people. For them, Canada is a bad. People are stealing the land. Indigenous people believe everything is connected and important. So just the whole aspect, and you can see this child is beginning to learn the language here. A recent, a child that has immigrated from another country, an ELL child. And then Watson, everyone should love the land because the land is a part of nature. Everything is land. We should respect the people who own the land because they have history. The sun brings light, the sun makes the rocks shine, and the colors of the land are beautiful. So from here, the children were invited to write and personalize their own land acknowledgement. So Shala, a recent newcomer from Africa, writes, "Please join me in acknowledging that we live, work, play, and learn and unlearn on the unceded traditional lands of the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish Coast Salish nations. I was born on these lands. My family came to the lands because of food. There was no food in Africa. This land means to me getting a higher chance for my happiness. The NBA." You can see the basketball in his hand. "I am committed to keeping these Indigenous lands safe." And you can definitely see the First Peoples principles of learning coming up through this, as well as his identity of where he's coming from and his growing understanding of the lands that he's on. So not only do loose parts offer us opportunity, but the various languages of art can also offer opportunities of representation and thinking. So Harini, I'm going to let you take over as we move into how clay might offer other possibilities of storing.
Yes. And so just to surface, you know, that children use language to construct meaning and understanding, but also to be human, and to use imagination and experience. And that in itself is a generosity that permits and allows children their full dignity, the holistic aspects of what we want in education. And welcoming languages, cultures, and their whole lives, and to notice and feel and slow down and pay attention, to inquire and reflect, and to imagine, as Faye reminded us, and create and expand experience by both, you know, being in the moment and talking about becoming. And so in the next slide, just really quickly, next few slides, one one aspect that came up in working with clay with young children in Surrey was how they all decided to think about it as playing with food. And so many children felt called to make cakes and chocolates and pastries and rotis. And they were rolling and cutting and molding and pinching and feeling and slipping and scoring. All of these were words. All of these was vocabulary that they learned. And they also understood concepts of flexibility and firmness and slowing down and speeding up because clay dries. And the new movements, new spatial arrangements, new languages, new ways of being in relationship with each other. One little example in the next slide is from this child who moved from the classroom to her home, from English to Punjabi. And so Samira was working so hard, and she scooped clay and shaped it carefully into a plate, and she rolled it into a roti and made a few bowls and turning and moisturizing it and attaching bowls into the clay. And then I asked her, so what's on the plate? And then she points here and said, it's my dinner. And here's roti, and here's dal, and here's dahi, and here's makhni and sabzi. And she moved in that sense from her warm hands to making warm food. She moved from clay to memory to story through identities, and all of these entangled spaces that become possible when we story with materials in sort of the generative ways in which the languages of art permit us. So I think Gina and I were so moved to see these beautiful stories of children drawing in their identities. Back to you, Gina. But just to celebrate clay as this beautiful material.
Yes, the language of clay offers so many possibilities. And so, we don't have time to go into other languages of art today. That's another day's exploration. Just want to continue to highlight the aspect of play. As you can see in the one photo with the two boys, friends playing building, when you want to build and see how high they can go. And when you build something high, you also know there's a great possibility that it will fall. And they were okay to take that risk and continue balancing and playing with theories and their understanding to test things out and their ideas. It did fall, and they were willing to try it again. And there's opportunity to work with one another, to collaborate, and to figure out different ways of representing and testing out what it is that they understand and their ideas that they bring forth. On the other side, you can see a child that is so engaged and focused and attending to detail. I've walked into so many classrooms and teachers go, we need more detail. Well, how can we help them attend and focus? This child chose this material when asked to invited to draw what it is you see, that slowing down and pausing. He stayed focused, and you could see the detail of him drawing every aspect of what he had created in regards to his story. Right. So what are we nurturing? What kind of dispositions are we nurturing when we slow down, and then how does that transfer to their other experience of literacy learning and experiences in the classroom? Right. So I want to end with a couple last stories. And this is a child, and I think Faye shared one at her end of her presentation, a child that worked with a student support worker who, and you have many of these in your classrooms that need a lot of support. Well, he came into the story studio, was so engaged with the material, stayed focused, and then was invited to draw or write. And he decided, I'm going to write. His support worker says, do you want me to help you? He goes, no, I'm going to do it myself. And, there he started writing. And then after he finished, we go, would you like to draw? He goes, yes. And then he drew. So you can see he can create, tell, write, draw, and share his story. And sometimes this actually opens opportunities for children to really let us see what the gifts that they bring to our classroom and what they're capable of and the possibilities that they have within them. So he was so proud of his work, and his support worker said, I've never seen him do so much work and he being so focused. So with the diversity in our classroom, I think this just gives them opportunities of choice and open-endedness that everyone has entry into this and feel success and confidence. And so I'm going to end with Georgia, a grade 2 student who came to the story studio, and when I came to read her work afterwards, it's like you can see the detail in her drawing, and then here are her words. Windows. Windows are, look at the windows that you pass by. Big, small, arched, curved, or rainbow. Any window is fine. Then look at the inside. Is there kids, adults, hugs, friends, pets? Just take a peek. Don't be afraid. Your surroundings are closer than you think. So we want to invite you to think about what stories can you find not only in this window of your laptop through our sharing of our stories, but through the windows that you see into your classrooms, the window that you look out, maybe where you're situated. What are the stories that you want to tell, that you want to invite to be created? And what is the world that you want to create through the stories that you tell? So with that, we will just share a few resources with you. There's QR codes. Material Encounters focuses in a local resource from Sylvia Kind up at Capilano University, exploring material encounters with different art materials. Loose Parts, there's a series of books around there. And then in Vancouver, I had created a story workshop invitations resource for teachers here. So there's QR codes for you to access those resources. And Haishika, thank you.
Nandri, Dhanyabad. And
Tashni
yes,
and Mercy.
yes, really, we wanted to, connect with imagination and literacies and stay attuned to children's stories and their beautiful participation in life, their artful, joyful ways of being. So thank you for this time and thank you for listening.
Yes.
Thank you, Harini and Gina. Just putting you in one person there. I got to spend the afternoon in a kindergarten mud kitchen outdoors yesterday. And what a great opportunity it was for kids to then be writing their recipes. And we brought the clipboards with us outside. So we didn't wait to write as kids were ready to write their stories. And so two young ladies that were right near me got started. And then they just started with their recipes as I went in conference with some other kids and did a little bit of scribing here and there. But the materials really created an opportunity for kids to write stories. And there were a lot of recipes. There was a lot of cutting up and grinding things together, but I just lived the experience of being outside with children and how those materials and those opportunities then fed right into their creating and their writing. And it just reminds me of language experience where, our speaking and our thinking and our experience moves into writing something. And because we're so motivated, we're telling these stories and moving from approximations into more and more formalized forms of language. I'm super excited to introduce Michelle Hikida, who has Faye Brownlie's name under her right now. I've had the great fortune to know Michelle for, wow, Michelle, just a few years now. And also to co-teach with her husband, Rick. So Michelle teaches grade 2-3 at Diefenbaker Elementary in Richmond, and we're just thrilled to feature some teaching in grade 2-3. I know we focused a lot on early primary in this series, and Gina and Harini have just kind of moved us through K-4. And so we're going to spend some time with Michelle in her classroom.
Hi, welcome everyone, and I'm really excited to be a part of this around so many people who are passionate about literacy and sharing some of the things I've been doing in my classroom. And as I look at the sidebar, I see some names of people who helped me along the way in what we now call here at Diefenbaker our literacy inquiries. And I think when I talk about literacy inquiries, I think the starting point for it is like, it starts with a rich question. So we come up with a really rich question, and then we surround the children with amazing books. And I think just to put it into perspective of how it falls within their year of literacy and reading, often in the first term, I spend time around nonfiction reading and writing. In the second term, we transition to fiction, and we really spend some time in that guided release of responsibility around those big thinking strategies. You know, by this time of the year and in grade 2, 3, they do so much great decoding. And now we want to think about, now that they can decode the words on the page, we want to make sure they're thinking along the way. And so we want to introduce and reintroduce things to some ideas they've had and the grades before around, you know, good readers make connections. They think about how does something that's happened in your own life make you better understand what you're reading here today? And what are those, have you seen this in another book, those text to text and text to worlds connections? We spend time in the second term thinking about good readers ask questions, and good readers make predictions, and good readers think about, what's the big idea anyhow? Like, why has the author written this story? And what can we get for it and take away from that? So in the beginning of the second term, we talk and we engage in tons of opportunities to kids to see teachers modeling their thinking, and then give them a chance to start to share and think about those things. After we've spent some time looking at that, we engage in lit circles, and where kids are reading similar chapter books, and they're recording their questions and their comments and their thinking around the chapter books they're reading, and then joining in dialogue. Once they've had some experiences that, we turn to the idea of this lit inquiry. And so what do I mean by that? Well, what we do is we start with a rich question. And those rich questions can be things that live in your classroom. Every year, my questions are different because the people sitting in that room are different. And so often I try to think of a big question that is meaningful to the children there. I know when some years, maybe there's some social and emotional, some friendship issues. I may choose a big question like, what makes someone a good friend? Or why do people choose to be mean or evil? Or, you know, who's the person you want to be? Or, you know, I had a class that they didn't love to persevere on tasks. So we had this big inquiry, and I had all these questions around, what do these books teach us about persevering? So the idea is I start with a big question that's going to be meaningful for the children in the class. Once I've kind of developed that question, then is the fun part, is trying to curate the books that are going to inspire them to want to read. And I think when I curate those books, I need to think about at least 25 to 30 books that address this big question that we're going to uncover together. And I think it's all about providing choice. There has to be some graphic novels and some chapter books, some fiction, some nonfiction. When I look at that basket after I pulled the collection, I need to think there has to be something, 2, 3, 4, 5 books in there for each person in my class. And I know as we've done a few in the year, in the term, I love it when the new question comes and I see people racing to the basket and stealing them and trying to hide the books they want. And I'm like, that is such a good problem to have. The kids are trying to hoard the ones they can't wait to read. So once I have the question and I have this collection of rich literature, then I turn it over to the kids and we start to talk about how we can think and share those discussions together. And so often we start with a read, a think aloud. And as the teacher, I'm going to model that. And often I do this with my resource teacher. And we talk about, one of us will read the book and the other person will share their thinking. So kids really see that modeled. As the story's happening, I'm recording on my thinking paper what I might want to share in these discussions we're going to have later. I think it's all about the modeling, and that helps children know what to do when it's their job to do it independently. The second thing, the third thing is those book talks. Once I have that collection, It's all about selling them. And I think I was so lucky to witness Faye do this with so many books. It's time to make everyone want to read the book you have in your hand. How can you get them excited to want to read these books that you've kind of curated for them? So this is an example of the modeling we did. We read this, I think this is an amazing story. If you haven't read it, you have to. It's one of my favorite children's books of all times. And as the resource teacher was reading it, I was modeling my thinking. As a reader who's connected to the text, what are my questions and what are my connections? And lastly, of course, how does that touch my heart and make me think differently about the world? You know, I think about after I read that book, I thought, how could I be more like Justin, the boy who brings color to the other little boy? And what gift can I do when I give the attention to somebody else? So I model that thinking before we even get started. So the actual structure of this lesson that will happen, basically it's read for something minutes. And I think every class is different. Some classes can read for 10 minutes, 15, you have to find what's right for you. During this time, I always have my resource teacher in the room because I always think 2 adults are always better when kids are reading and thinking. So for my resource teacher and I, what we've done is we've kind of divided the class in half. We know we're each going to focus on half the class so that we can provide those, while they're reading, those rich conversations with kids. We want to talk about what they're doing as readers and what they're doing as thinkers to nudge them along their reading and thinking journey. Everyone's conference is going to look and sound differently. Maybe I'm doing a little mini lesson for someone on remembering how to decode a word or pausing at punctuation, or somebody else, we're thinking about what text-to-text connections can you make and how can you use expression to make stories come alive. I think those beautiful conversations we have with children is that moment to really connect with them around great books. So we read, and at the end of that 20, 25 minutes of reading, we always do something. And the three formats we take is we either say something, we make something, or we write something. When we first begin a lit inquiry, we mostly always say something. We have lots of time to just engage kids in rich literature. So there's rich conversations around what they're reading. I always think before we can get kids to write great things, they have to hear lots of talk about that before they're going to be able to produce something. So that idea of making these questions come alive for them, hearing lots of perspectives, being able to take something you hear one day from someone and adding it into your thinking. I think we all know that we're better when we're together. And so many times I sit back and I've read all the books that are in the collection and someone will bring something that I've never thought. I'm like, Malia, today you've rocked my world. I never thought of the book in this way. And I think that's what's exciting, that these reading and sharing with kids, my eyes are opened up to different things in their reading and thinking. Often, we do have a thinking paper, and I always think of thinking paper, there's always a fine line. Like, I never want to kill reading with a response all the time. If kids always know, every time I read a book, she's going to make me write about it, we could kill books. Like all of a sudden kids are trying not to finish too many books because they know I'm going to make them answer. So the idea of the thinking paper is just for them. It's the tracks of your thinking so that when we come together in those discussion groups, you have something to share so that you won't forget. Like often kids, before I had the thinking paper, is like, I can't remember what I wanted to share. So the idea is they can come confidently to their lit discussion with something, a connection, a question, something to be able to share with the group that they're chatting with around the books that they're loving. So, and I think this is an example of one of the thinking papers of one of the students. So he was reading a book about a true story about a woman who saw a bunch of plastic bags all over Africa that was causing so much harm to the environment. And so he created this symbol, and it's like the plastic bag is in the middle, and then there's the women that are helping to weave and get rid of those plastic bags, and it's saving all the animals. So this, he wrote in his thinking paper, was like, this is a symbol represents peace. One bag can make a whole problem, and one woman can solve it. And then his last thing, what can we do to make the world a better place? So that idea of providing time for them to record their thinking. And I think what's so exciting too is seeing this rich thinking that all of the children were having around the books that they're reading. I love too that oftentimes kids will talk about, they'll choose a quote that's really powerful for them. You'll see on Rose's Garden, someone wrote, may his powerful story be the seed of hope, Ted Kennedy. And I love that as children get on and on, you can see on the other side of the living hummingbird, this Josh D is actually a student in our class, and he has come up with a quote he believes we should all think deeply about. And Josh's quote was, if you believe it, you can do it. And the power of one is 101. And I think, yeah, those are quotes that we need to talk about. What does Josh mean by this? And that sharing and honoring their voices and knowing that what they're saying and thinking is really important, and that these things make us all a little bit smarter when we hear them. And I love that I teach in a multi-grade class with grade 2 and 3, and I often have children stay for the grade 3. And I love to see the growth, because some of the children, when they're first starting, this is hard stuff, like big thinking. And what's amazing to see is the growth over 2 years. When you surround yourself and you hear teachers and students sharing big thinking about reading, you too become one of those big thinkers. And I think it's such a beautiful way for them to support and nudge each other in their oral language development and in their thinking about books and literacy. Here are some other ones. I love it that some things so simple. Life is easy. You just need to spread kindness. Like, isn't that what life is all about? And I think these thinking papers are a way for them to keep track of what they want to share when we come in those discussion circles. So we look at, usually during those lit circles, if we do a lit circle, we usually do one for about 3 weeks. I kind of do it till I see the buzz of the books dying down. And then I'm like, we need a new question and we need new books, because I always want it exciting for them. And so once we've read for a few weeks, we'll have discussions, 2 or 3, maybe 4 discussion days. And then once they've had those, we'll go on to the, sorry, I got lost track for a second. These are some examples of the say somethings, and I'm going to try to play one, and just maybe Leyton, you can give me the thumbs up if we can hear it really well. So this is the question around these ones was, what does it mean to be a good friend? What are good friends? And this is some of the voices of the children.
I'm reading universally, and I said good friends trust each other.
And this is someone else about friendship.
I'm reading Moonwear, and good friends don't brag about if they're better.
And I think those rich conversations, hearing the voices, that being a good friend can mean lots of different things. This drawing this boy had during his say something it was one of those moments where as a teacher, you can feel your lip quivering a little bit. And this little boy went on to say that in my family right now, my brother's having a really hard time. That's him with the big eyes, and he's, and I knew that his brother was having a hard time. He was having some mental health issues. The family was all absorbed in meeting the needs of the brother. And then you see him, me, and the little picture of him falling through. He goes, I know how it feels to be the invisible boy. Right now, I'm the invisible boy in my family, because all of our attention has to go to Ken right now. And I'm like, is that a deep connection or what? But that idea of not only hearing his stories, and I always think when children share that little bit, all of a sudden you're connected to that person. So guess what? When you're interacting with Ty, you got to make sure he's not invisible, because we know right now in his family, he might be invisible. So we got to make sure we all see Ty all day long so that we can share with him. I love this little girl, and I took her, once she'd shared, she had all these books she had connections with, and it was too loud. So I just got her to come to the back room, because I love what she said about the text-to-text connections.
Desmond and the very mean word. On this page is a quote that says, when people say mean words to us, we often feel ashamed of who we are. And then it says, everything you do matters. And I made a connection to... Okay, stop.
So that was just me letting her get the next book.
I made a connection to this book that's called The Butterfly Effect. And on one of the pages, it says, everything you do matters. Every move you make, every action you take matters. Also, another page, you have been created as one of a kind on the planet Earth. There has never been one like you.
So I think that idea of really providing children a chance to share, when we were sharing some of the questions and talking about what it means to be a good friend, in the middle of this conversation about great books, there was one student and he said, you know, I hear what everyone's saying about being a good friend, and I think I do that, but I still don't have anyone to play with at recess and lunch. And my heart's breaking a little. And then one little boy jumps in and he's like, well, sometimes you just have to ask, Cody. People might not notice you have no one to play with. Just ask. And then Aiden jumps in and says, yeah, Josh, but it's not always easy to ask. It's scary to ask because what happens if they say no? Sometimes it takes courage to ask. And I'm thinking about this amazing conversation we are having about friendship. And then I paused for a moment and reflected on what the children were sharing. And then finally I said, you know what? I think Aiden's right. It does take courage. And I wonder if any of you have ever thought of that. And then I said, I guess Cody's really wondering about who he can trust to say yes. Like, who will say yes if Cody asks? And of course, I teach grade 2, 3. So everyone's hand is going up and they're like, oh, Cody, me. And just seeing him like surrounded. But I love that then Jamie says, because he knows Cody and Cody does have some social issues. And so he was being real. And he's like, Jamie says, you know, you just have to remember that if they say yes, you have to make sure you don't ruin the fun, Cody. I think sometimes kids forget about ruining or cheating. All those things ruin the fun. Like in Manhunt, some people quit when it's their turn. It's not fair. If you want to be able to play with kids, you have to play fair. And I think, wow, he's right. So think of all of these books we were reading, all of these things we were doing in our class coming into a real live situation. And these books were helping us really play through that. When we look at, after we've had, you know, maybe 2, 4, 6, 8 times to read and talk about. So after we finish reading, we meet, because I do it with the resource teacher, we'll each take half the groups and we'll do those say somethings. Then we'll turn to the one day we'll do, instead of a say something, we'll make something. So thinking about the question that we had, what can you make to represent your thinking around this question? So the first one here is the mirrors, and it was around the question about what do you need to be a friend? Like what does it take to be a good friend? And so this is Josh Dees, and he said, you know, life is like a mirror. If you do good things will come back to you. If you do mean things will come back to you. Wow. The second one there is another one. They created this, that's a person in the middle and all these seeds around the outside. And they wrote, each seed represents him sprouting new friends. Sometimes you have to work hard to grow friends. Some other examples is, I love this one. It's just like a jungle gym. And he wrote, friendship is all about having fun. Someone else's representation of what makes a good friend is this idea is friendship is all about helping others. If someone is hurt or in need, that's what you need to do. This is why a Band-Aid represents friendship to me. So that idea of giving them time after they speak and say something to then make something. Another question we looked about is, who is someone that's inspirational? What makes someone inspirational? And so after we had read and had those say somethings, we looked at building something, the say something. And this person wrote, on the right, inspirational people don't get rewarded. They help. On the right, inspirational people don't get a reward. They just help. The second one is inspirational people have bright moments and dark moments, but no matter what, they're always brave in the heart. So that idea of really giving children time to be able to share. The last one, I'm just looking at the clock here. The last one I just want to share is that example of the beauty of multi-grade classrooms, the beauty of children spending time in rich conversations over a long period of time. My last one here is, my dear sweet Valentina. And I think the question was all about what makes someone's inspirational. And I think when we first started doing this, working and thinking, creating symbols, this was hard for her. This took time and she sometimes wasn't ready for it yet. But by the end of her grade 3, this is what she wrote. Inspirational people have bright moments and dark moments, but no sorry, right, reading the wrong one. Sorry, this one with the jewels. If you don't try, life will be plain and boring. If you try, your life will be filled with color. And it warms my heart to think, look at her growth, because she surrounded herself over years of speaking and listening to literacy in action. Once children have had a chance to say something and then build something, then the writing becomes so easy because they have so much to write about. One of the inquiries we did once were, who's the person you want to be? And after we spent time reading books about who we wanted to be, building symbols about who we wanted to be, then we could write about something we wanted to be. And so here's some examples. Who's the person you want to be? Well, I want to be empathetic. I want to be kind when someone's hurt or sad. I also want to be the person who never gives up, never backs down. If I fall, I will get right back up. Someone else writes, brave. Brave is a thing that I'm not good at. It is something that's not easy. Brave is standing up for yourself in front of bullies, even though they may choose not to listen. You have to do your best, give your best shot, and then that's all you can do. Brave is being strong, being courageous, and also standing up for yourself. You should at least try and tell the person to stop. So I think all of these are such powerful examples of when children have time to read, to think, to talk about, and then to write about what powerful responses we can get. I think just to finish off, we look at those. I love that as time goes on, after the first inquiry, the second inquiry, kids start to suggest books. The first one is, I was doing the big question of why do some people choose evil or mean? And after about the second day, they're like, there are some books missing from this inquiry, Mrs. Hikida. And I'm like, oh, there are? Okay, tell them to me. And so I quickly jotted down all the books they think that should be included, because these also have mean or evil characters. And we can look closely at what made these characters even mean. And I think that's the beauty of giving them the ownership that's so important. And then even more so, that idea of then they started to generate the questions they wanted to do. You know, someone said, I think we should read about saving the earth. And I'm like, we should definitely read about saving the earth. If I went to the library to curate another basket of books to uncover that question together. So in closing, I think the big ideas that lit inquiries provide, I think it's a place to develop oral language skills, a place to have rich conversations about great books, a place to engage in joyful reading, a place to think deeply about different books, and a place to engage in writing and responding to great books. And that's it. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Michelle. I got to spend the afternoon with your class and watch in 20 minutes, maybe 25 minutes, kids each read 4 different picture books as they were reading and working on their thinking pages. And I was able to conference with 7 kids and hear them read large sections of their books and engage with them. And I was so struck by, first of all, how clearly they're constantly conferencing with you and your resource teacher partner, because they were just like, the one little fellow I came to first, he's like, don't interrupt me. I'm like, can I listen? He's like, oh, of course, but don't interrupt me. And so I was there, and then he looked at me, and clearly it was time to interrupt him. It was like, now would you like to ask me a question? Another friend was reading a beautiful doll, the one about William Wants a Doll. And I'm like, why did you choose this book? And she's like, it touches my heart. And that was the focus. Today's focus was read several books and find one that touches your heart. And so I really enjoyed spending time with kids who were reading, and then working with multiple books and then finding one where they had something that it said something to them. But also that chance to conference with them, and just how important it is for us to spend time conference with kids constantly to see where they're at and to help nudge them along. So I enjoyed time in your classroom and experiencing what you're talking about today. I'm going to pass over to Faye to say a few words. Oh, Faye's like, back to me.
Okay. So I think the piece that I want to just sort of close with as we're finishing up is thinking about those examples that came from Harini and Gina, starting with the young kids in oral language and making and talking and building and playing with their materials, and how that grew into response and writing and moved through the art piece, and what that looked like as we came into Michelle's class and thinking about the pieces. So what does it look like when we have kids with more literacy skill under their belt by the time they come into the 2 and 3? And how do we continue to use books to open up the world to kids so that they have eyes on text, that they're not alone in the room, that we're remembering that reading and writing are based on, James Britton has said, 60 years ago, reading and writing float on a sea of talk. These are busy, loud, at times, quieter at times, classrooms where oral language is prized, and it takes us into eyes on print, and it takes us into opportunities for kids to write from the rich language experiences that they're doing. And none of this happens without direct instruction as well, in skills, in specific vocabulary, in looking at how we incorporate what do they need at this point in time with their word work, and where do we move from there as we're going. And I also was in Michelle's room this afternoon. I was reading a book, or listening to a little girl read, and she came to a phrase about wild being found in cracks and crannies. And she tried to explain to me what wild was, and she was sort of figuring that out. And then as she was decoding, is sometimes found in cracks, and she pulled it apart and she got the cracks. And I said to her, so, and do you know what a crack is? Yep, she did. And so she did another start again, and she looked, and crannies, and she looked at crannies, and you could just see the look on her face. It was like, oh my gosh, what would be in here? And it wasn't a word in her oral vocabulary. So though she got the cran, and then she looked at the IES at the end, and her eyes just sort of turned to me, and she said, cran? I said, crannies. And here's why. And let's talk about how you figured out this word. And she found the ran, and then she could do the cran, but she came out to crannies at the end. She couldn't get to the end because she didn't actually have it in her oral vocabulary. And so we talked a little bit about that. And then we talked about what kind of strategy she was using to get the cracks and the crannies, and how she had to persevere, Michelle's word, and look what she learned to do. And how she now owned that, and she could use that again, because all of these rich literacy activities that we've talked about come back from that piece: phonics, phonemic awareness, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension, and how we balance them for what the kids need to get them to be readers who read and writers who write. And that's that piece that we're looking toward. And in order to do that, just as we did today with a variety of voices, and as we've tried to do through the series, we listen to one another and find out what's working in your classroom, and what kind of questions have you got to move the learning forward for these kids, and how do we work together in ways that encompass the strengths and stretches of the educators that we have in this province, who've been doing such a good job of working together to promote literacy. And we want to continue to be doing that job to promote literacy as best we can when we're all working within the context of our curriculum and our guidance from our researchers. Thank you.
Faye. Thank you, Faye. Thanks, Harini. Thank you, Gina. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you to the other sharers of their practice over the sessions this year. I'm just thrilled as we think about how we are continuing to foster and develop not just literacy, but our own practice, and looking across the different bodies of research to draw from them to say, so what can we do to help our students all grow even more where they're from in a responsive way? Looking forward to engaging with you all over the course of the work we do in this province and beyond. Have a great week, everyone. Happy end of April, 2 months to go.
Aha.